She thought she could have it all, a husband who would always be there and a lover to keep things exciting. But when he stopped waiting and found someone else, she realized too late that she was the one being left behind. Hello, my dear viewers. Isn't it fascinating how life has a way of balancing the scales? When those who once betrayed must finally face the very pain they inflicted, it feels like the universe is setting things right. After 25 years of marriage, a husband finds himself confronting an unexpected betrayal. His wife suggests an open relationship, but the way things unfold is far from what she expected. And as always, my dear friends, if you enjoy these stories, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Now let's dive in. Daniel, don't give me that look. It's not uncommon for women over 40 to find younger lovers and eventually get divorced. Samantha spoke nonchalantly, waving off her husband's sarcastic expression as she adjusted her earrings in the mirror. She was preparing for a date, but Daniel, seated in the corner of the room, wasn't letting her actions go unnoticed. He let out a quiet sigh and muttered, "Oh, is that so?" Samantha barely glanced at him before returning to her reflection, applying the final touch of eyeliner. "You won't leave me, Daniel," she said with confidence. "And what makes you so sure?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "Because you love me," she replied, her tone almost playful. "And no matter what I have planned for tonight, you know I love you too. This is just a little something on the side. A distraction. It doesn't change what we have together." Daniel chuckled dryly. "Oh, how considerate of you. Come on," she sighed, rolling her eyes. "Every woman I know has a younger lover. Even Joanne Bennett, of all people." "Joanne? The ever-so-righteous Joanne?" Daniel asked, feigning surprise. "Yes, even her," Samantha confirmed with a smirk. "She understands the rules of the game. Why should she care what her husband does? He's had flings with his assistants for years, and she just looks the other way." A heavy silence settled between them as they sat in the dimly lit room, both absorbed in their own thoughts. Meanwhile, Samantha, now barefoot, walked toward the front door and opened it to greet Ryan, her charming 32-year-old companion for the evening. "Hey Ryan. Sorry for the delay," she said casually, tossing her hair over one shoulder. "Looks like my husband is making this more complicated than I expected." Ryan, dressed sharply as always, flashed a confident smile. "Don't worry, Samantha. You're definitely worth the wait." She returned his grin and, without looking back, headed down the hallway toward her home office. As she stepped inside, the glow from the hallway light reflected off the glass shelves, casting shadows across the room. She found herself momentarily lost in thought. Ryan's energy was intoxicating, reminding her of a younger version of Daniel. She didn't hold it against her husband for not being as lively as Ryan. After all, there was a 13-year age gap between them. But being around Ryan made her feel alive again, and she craved that feeling. They weren't officially dating, of course. But they'd had coffee together a few times when their schedules aligned, and she couldn't deny the attraction between them. What surprised her the most wasn't his flirtation, but the fact that she found herself eagerly reciprocating. Ryan took a step closer, lowering his voice just enough to make her heart race. "I'm really glad you accepted my invitation, Samantha," he murmured. "You're incredible." She smiled, feeling a rush of excitement. "Thank you, Ryan," she said softly. And just like that, she closed the door behind her, leaving the past, if only for the night, on the other side. "I must say your compliments are very flattering," Samantha said, offering Ryan a polite yet firm smile. "But I want to be clear. I'm happily married and I have no intention of leaving my husband. I hope you understand that our time together is purely platonic. There's nothing more to it than good company and conversation." Ryan nodded, his expression easygoing. "I understand completely," he assured her. "I just wanted to spend the evening with a charming, intelligent, and sophisticated woman like you." Their night had been enjoyable, full of engaging conversation and laughter. Ryan was charming, no doubt, but Samantha reminded herself that her life with Daniel was still her priority. Daniel wasn't much of an art lover, so outings like these weren't something they shared. But perhaps she had made a mistake by allowing Ryan to pick her up from home. As the night came to an end, Ryan glanced at her. "What time should I pick you up tomorrow?" "It's a morning performance," she replied, adjusting her scarf. "Let's meet at 11 a.m. so we can have lunch beforehand." With their plans set, Ryan drove Samantha back to the house she shared with Daniel. As the car pulled into the driveway, she hesitated for a moment, then leaned over and gave Ryan a quick kiss on the cheek before stepping out. Her thoughts immediately turned to Daniel. She could already picture him, either sulking in his office chair or waiting in the living room, ready to start an argument. Maybe, she mused, it would be best if he moved his things to the spare room. It would give them both some space to adjust. After all, wasn't it only fair? Men often experienced a decline in passion as they aged, yet women seeking satisfaction elsewhere were judged far more harshly. Samantha had come to believe that men should be more understanding about women's needs. After all, wasn't intimacy just another part of life? The next morning she wasn't surprised to wake up and find Daniel gone. His reaction the night before had made it clear that he needed time to process everything. She only hoped he wouldn't stay away for too long. She had planned to spend the entire day with him before her next outing with Ryan on Sunday. But as the hours passed and he remained absent, an unsettling feeling settled in her chest. That evening when he finally returned home, the tension between them was thick. "It seems to me that keeping things discreet would be less painful for both of us," Daniel said at last, his voice carefully controlled. Samantha sighed. "I understand," she admitted. Daniel shook his head. "I don't remember the last time you made an effort to meet with our friends, but you've already seen him last night, and now you're planning to meet him again tomorrow. He seems to be more important than them." "As I told you before, this is the only way to truly get to know him," Samantha explained. "You know, I've never rushed into physical intimacy. Even back in college Daniel cut her off. "So, you're saying it's only a matter of time?" Samantha hesitated before answering. "If that's what you need to hear, then yes," she said, her voice soft but unwavering. She had already shared her plan with Ryan. She intended to go on several more dates in a more intimate setting than just a cafe. In her mind, 5 dates would be enough to determine whether she was ready to take the next step. But she had already decided that it would only happen during the day, or at times when Daniel would be unavailable. She was torn. Part of her wanted this freedom, this chance to explore something new. But another part of her dreaded the thought of it creating irreparable damage in her marriage. As he did every Saturday before reviewing his quarterly reports, Daniel retreated to his study, immersing himself in work to clear his thoughts. He had always been deeply attached to her, and despite everything he still worried about her. He wanted to believe that she was being honest, that nothing physical had happened between her and Ryan. But as he sat at his desk, memories of the night before surfaced, the way she kissed Ryan after their first date. And for the first time, Daniel wondered if this was the beginning of the end. Daniel couldn't help but assume, despite everything, that Samantha would eventually stay true to herself. He knew his only chance was to give his all, to try to convince her not to go through with it. Because once she crossed that line, once she became intimate with Ryan, there would be no turning back. As far as Daniel was concerned, there was no way he could be with her after that. The thought of Samantha being with Ryan and then coming home to him was unbearable. It wasn't just about betrayal, it was about dignity. She wouldn't go to Ryan with the scent of her husband still on her, and Daniel certainly wouldn't accept her back after she had been with someone else. The idea was both disrespectful and deeply unsettling. Meanwhile, Samantha stood in the shower, the warm water running over her skin as she pondered the situation. She tried to find a way to ease Daniel's pain, but there was only one true solution: to abandon the idea of having a lover altogether. And yet, that was not an option she was willing to consider. She stepped out of the shower and carefully selected her outfit, something modest but undeniably alluring. She slipped on a pair of sheer stockings, smoothing them over her legs as she caught a glimpse of herself in the mirror. In many ways, Daniel and Ryan were completely different men. She couldn't help but wonder what experiences she had missed out on by being with only one type of man for so long. It wasn't a criticism of Daniel. After all, no one could be everything at once, but Ryan had a certain energy that intrigued her. Oddly enough, she realized how well the two men balanced each other. Any new interest she had, she imagined, would likely resonate with at least one of them. A thought crossed her mind: what if she could somehow involve Daniel in this? If she could make him understand, if he could find his own place in this dynamic, then maybe, just maybe, her connection with Ryan wouldn't have to be purely physical. "How about Tuesday?" Ryan asked, considering her schedule. "It won't work on Mondays, but Tuesday should be fine," Samantha replied. "I'll have time to freshen up before I go home, so plan everything accordingly." "Got it," Ryan said. "I'll bring the necessary supplies and we'll go over the details tomorrow morning at Starbucks." Later that evening, Ryan drove back to the restaurant parking lot to pick up Samantha's car. When she arrived home around 6:30 p.m., the house was quiet. She felt a rush of excitement as she stepped inside, her phone in hand. But when she checked for a message from Daniel, there was nothing. Frowning, she hurried into the bedroom, already thinking of ways to smooth things over with him. She barely had time to gather her thoughts before Daniel's voice cut through the silence. I don't care about your date, Samantha, he said flatly. She turned to him, taken aback. Daniel, I didn't mean to. No more talking about this. Without another word, he stood abruptly, his half-eaten meal forgotten on the table. He turned and walked down the hallway, disappearing into his office without looking back. Samantha sat in stunned silence for a few moments before quietly gathering the plates and clearing the table. As she placed them in the sink, a heavy realization settled over her. Maybe this had been a mistake after all. Samantha carefully packed the leftovers, setting them aside in case Daniel wanted to take them to work the next day. He had always enjoyed her cooking, and despite everything, she still took comfort in small gestures like this. But by the time evening rolled around, she had made up her mind. She was done pleading for his attention. She would continue seeing Ryan while still maintaining the role of Daniel's devoted wife. If Daniel chose not to play his part in their marriage, that was his decision. She would no longer beg him to engage. Sticking to her usual routine, Samantha dressed as she always did, met up with friends at Starbucks, and acted as if nothing had changed. But when she arrived and spotted Ryan sitting in the corner, their eyes met instantly, an unspoken understanding passing between them. After ordering coffee, she joined him at the table. They kept their distance, refraining from any obvious displays of affection. There was no need to draw attention. Yet, only minutes after stepping into Ryan's apartment, Samantha found herself lying on her back, giving herself completely to another man for the first time in 25 years. She had expected guilt, hesitation, something. But instead, she was consumed by raw desire, as if every touch, every moment, had been leading up to this inevitable surrender. She clung to him, gasping for more, the intensity of it leaving her breathless. It felt like one long drawn-out climax, stretching into something beyond just physical pleasure. Afterward, they lay together in Ryan's bed, wrapped in a quiet, lingering intimacy. He traced lazy circles on her skin, a smirk playing on his lips. "Was it amazing?" he murmured. "Was I better than your husband?" Samantha sat up, her expression cool as she met his gaze. "We are not discussing my husband," she said firmly. Ryan chuckled, but he didn't press the matter. A short while later, after one last lingering kiss, they said their goodbyes. Samantha headed home while Ryan left for work. As she waited for Daniel's return, she busied herself, checking her reflection in the mirror multiple times. Everything had to be perfect. If Daniel suspected nothing, there would be no reason for any unnecessary conflict. At exactly 7:13 p.m., the front door opened and Daniel stepped inside. Samantha greeted him warmly, wrapping her arms around him and pressing a soft kiss to his cheek. But as she pulled away, she noticed something, an unfamiliar weight in his expression, something distant. "Dinner's ready," she said, offering a smile. "I made your favorite." "I'm not hungry," he replied flatly. "Darling, you need to eat," she insisted gently. "I'm fine, thanks." "Daniel, please. You have to take care of yourself." "I doubt you've had anything healthy all day," she urged. He let out a slow breath, shaking his head. "I've tried to be polite about this, but I see now that it doesn't matter," he muttered. "I don't want to eat what you cooked. I'll find something for myself later." He waved her off and Samantha felt her stomach twist. Without another word, she turned and left the room, suddenly realizing she wasn't hungry either. Silently, she placed the food into the fridge, telling herself that perhaps she could offer it to Ryan instead. As she walked down the hall to the bedroom, she began to undress. But just as she reached for the zipper of her dress, a sudden realization gripped her. This was real. Not just a fantasy, not just an idea. She had done it. She had crossed the line. And now there was no going back. Daniel stiffened as Samantha reached for his shirt buttons, misinterpreting her actions as an attempt to seduce him. "Stop, Samantha. Please stop," he pleaded, stepping back. She frowned but kept her voice steady. "I'm just trying to help you get ready for bed." "I don't want you to do that," he muttered, avoiding her gaze. "Just a few more buttons," she insisted, her fingers lingering. Frustrated, Daniel pushed her hands away. "Enough, Samantha. Keep your filthy hands off me." The sharpness in his voice cut through the air, making her recoil. Stung, she stepped back, her arms dropping to her sides. A tense silence settled between them, but her mind was already drifting elsewhere, to Ryan. Their next meeting was scheduled for Thursday morning, and the thought of it gnawed at her. The day before, they had met at Starbucks to coordinate their schedules. Mondays were out due to Ryan's demanding workload, and Samantha had chosen to avoid Fridays and weekends to preserve the time she still spent with Daniel. They had settled on Tuesdays and Thursdays, spaced apart just enough to keep things from feeling too frequent, too routine. That evening, she went through the motions of meeting her friends, but the conversation blurred into background noise. She counted the minutes until she could leave, eager to focus on what really mattered to her. Back at home, as Daniel walked through the door, she met him with the same question that had become routine. "Daniel, are you going to eat my cooking tonight, or should I just worry about myself?" "I'm fine," he replied, not meeting her eyes. "I had a snack on the way home." "You shouldn't eat so much fast food, it's not good for you," she chided. "I know," he said dismissively. "I'll be in my office." "Daniel," she called after him before he could disappear down the hall. "When you have a minute, I'd like to discuss something with you." Okay, he replied, waving her off before shutting the door to his office. Samantha sighed and turned her attention to her preparations for the upcoming fundraiser. She noticed that Daniel barely engaged with her anymore, avoiding her as much as possible. When they finally sat down for their conversation, he got straight to the point. "Samantha, is this your final decision?" His voice was calm but strained. "Is there anything I can say or do to convince you to end things with Ryan?" She hesitated for a moment, but her resolve remained firm. "I'm sorry, Daniel. But no." Daniel exhaled slowly, his expression unreadable. "Well, I appreciate your honesty," he said, though disappointment was evident in his tone. "Even if it's not what I wanted to hear. I guess I'll have to figure out how to handle this," he added quietly. "Is that all you wanted to tell me?" he asked. She reached for his hand, her voice soft. "Just that I love you, Daniel. I truly do. I hope you understand that." He didn't respond right away, his silence speaking volumes. Later, as she prepared for bed, she considered the minor inconveniences she now had to navigate, like taking an extra shower in the middle of the day to keep Daniel from suspecting anything. But she believed in time that things would settle. Eventually, everything would return to normal. At least that's what she kept telling herself. As Samantha sat with her friends, she listened as they shared stories about their weekends with their partners. Their laughter and anecdotes filled the air, but her mind was elsewhere. She found herself drifting back to the time she had spent with Ryan, replaying every touch, every whispered word. Just the memory of it was enough to stir something inside her. Her heart began to race and she felt a warmth spreading through her body. "Are you okay, Samantha? Your face looks a little flushed," one of her friends asked. "I'm fine," she said quickly, forcing a smile. "Just feeling a little warm, that's all." Later that evening, when Daniel came home, she greeted him as usual. "Did you have dinner?" she asked casually. "I had a late lunch, it's fine," he replied. "Is there anything you want to talk about?" she prompted, hoping for some kind of conversation. "No," he said simply. "I'll be in my office." "Okay," she responded, adding playfully, "I'll be here if you need me, or when you decide you do." Daniel didn't reply. He just walked down the hall, softly closing the door behind him. Left alone in the living room once again, Samantha sighed. She couldn't ignore how Daniel seemed to split his time between working and avoiding her. But she reminded herself, this was all part of the plan. She had promised to give him space, to let him process things in his own way. Returning to her book, she tried to focus, but the words blurred together. Lately, she and Daniel felt more like distant acquaintances than husband and wife. Despite the excitement she felt with Ryan, she couldn't deny the truth. There was no emotional depth to their affair. It was purely physical. With Daniel it was different. With Daniel it was love. And she missed it desperately. That night she decided to lay everything out honestly. "Daniel," she said softly, approaching him as he sat in his office, "I need you to know how much I—" But he cut her off with a quiet sigh. "Samantha, I've already told you, I won't be with you while Ryan is in the picture." His words stung more than she expected. She had hoped he would come around on his own, given time. But now she realized he might need a little push. So she decided to change her approach. If Daniel refused to act on his feelings, she would remind him of what they once had. She would intensify the flirtation, reignite the spark. She started wearing more revealing clothes to bed, or sometimes nothing at all. She found reasons to brush against him, to lean into him, to remind him of the connection they used to share. She wasn't going to give up on them. The next morning she stepped into the office building, her heels clicking against the polished floors. As soon as she exited the elevator, a familiar voice greeted her warmly. "Mrs. Lynch, it's great to have you back. It's been a long time since your last visit," Terry, the firm's longtime secretary, said with a bright smile. Samantha returned the greeting, slipping easily into the role of the confident, put-together woman she had always been. But beneath the polished exterior, her mind was still caught in the storm of everything happening behind closed doors. She had made her choice. Now she just had to wait and see what Daniel would do next. "I'm glad to see you too," Samantha said with a warm smile. "Is Daniel in his office?" She was already making her way toward the door. "Yes, he is," Terry confirmed. "But could you wait a moment?" Samantha paused, glancing back. "They're handling confidential documents this morning," Terry explained. "I've been instructed to announce anyone before they go in." She quickly picked up the phone, notifying Daniel of Samantha's arrival. Inside the office, Daniel leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. Across from him, his assistant, Alana, was organizing a stack of files. "Thank you, Alana. You can take a break for lunch," he said. "We'll continue at 2. "Yes, sir," she responded briskly, gathering her things before striding toward the door. As she exited, Samantha watched her go, a thought crossing her mind. How does she even walk in those heels without tripping? "I hope you didn't come here just to make snide remarks about my assistant," Daniel said dryly, interrupting her thoughts. "Your assistant?" Samantha asked, raising an eyebrow. "What happened to Eileen?" "She was promoted," Daniel replied. "She's now the executive assistant to the CEO. The workload became too much, so we had to restructure." Samantha nodded absent-mindedly before steering the conversation toward what she really wanted to ask. "So, what exactly do you know about Ryan?" Daniel met her gaze, his expression unreadable. "Actually, I know quite a bit," he admitted. "I did my research." Samantha's stomach clenched slightly, but she forced herself to remain composed. "I looked into him," Daniel continued. "That's how I know about your regular visits to his apartment, every Tuesday and Thursday. And I couldn't help but notice how you conveniently meet with me on Wednesdays, as if that balances everything out." He leaned forward, his voice calm but firm. "As I said before, at least he's not a crook or someone using you for money. But I won't pretend to be blind to what's happening. I prefer to be aware." Samantha folded her arms. "Daniel, you make it sound like I've been hiding this from you. I've been honest from the beginning. I own a very successful company," he said, ignoring her comment. "We both earn significant incomes. If I were the type of man who wanted to control you, I'd have cut you off financially by now. But that's not the issue here, is it?" She remained silent, watching him carefully. "You can tell yourself that your time with Ryan is just another personal interest like spending time with friends," Daniel said, his voice steady. "But it's not the same. It's completely different and you know it." She started to speak, but he cut her off. "I don't mind you having your own life. No one should revolve around just one person. But I can't pretend that our marriage is the same while you're involved with another man. Your claim that nothing has changed is ridiculous. There used to be 2 people in this marriage. Now there are 3. So no, Samantha, it's not the same." She pressed her lips together, unsure of how to respond. As much as she wanted to believe that their arrangement could continue smoothly, the truth was clear. They couldn't ignore what was happening forever. That evening, Daniel arrived home late, just before 9 p.m., having given Samantha a heads-up earlier in the day. While waiting for him, she had busied herself with dinner and tidying up, trying to settle the tension in her mind. But as soon as he walked in, she knew there was no avoiding the conversation any longer. "Daniel," she said gently, setting down the dish towel. "Can we talk?" "I don't know what else to say, Samantha," Daniel said, his voice weary. "You chose to have an affair despite my objections." She opened her mouth to respond, but he continued before she could. "And it's been almost a year. What bothers me is that you don't seem to think the real problem is what you did. You think the issue is just that I disagree with it." Samantha crossed her arms. "That's not fair, Daniel. You and I both know that out of the 4 couples you admire, only Rick and Gail managed to stay together after the wife had an affair," he pointed out. "And even then, it's not the kind of relationship you'd want." Samantha frowned. "That's not true. Joan and Wendell are still together and they're happy." Daniel let out a humorless laugh. "Joan only started her affair in response to Wendell's infidelity. And when he found out, he ended things with her without any hesitation. No arguments, no attempts to fix it." She shook her head. "I find that hard to believe. Joan always talks about how wonderful her marriage is." "She's pretending," Daniel said bluntly. "They hardly spend time together. The only time they put on that happily married act is at public events." Samantha hesitated, processing his words. But then her expression shifted, her eyes narrowing as a new thought crossed her mind. "Speaking of pretending," she said sharply, "what about that new girl you hired?" Daniel remained calm, unbothered by her outburst. He had been expecting this reaction. I hired Alana shortly after you gave that speech about how I should expand the team, he said, his tone neutral. I told the truth, that Eileen needed help and that we needed to create another position. But the reality is I hired Alana based on her qualifications. She has a solid business education, and she came highly recommended. Samantha scoffed. And conveniently, her job required you to spend a lot of time together? Daniel didn't flinch. Yes. And after a few months, I felt comfortable with her. Samantha's jaw tightened. So what? You planned this? You waited until you knew I'd be busy working late so you could? As I told you before, Daniel interrupted, we were already living like neighbors. You made your decision and I made mine. She let out a bitter laugh. That's not the same, Daniel. My time with Ryan didn't interfere with our time together. You can't say the same. Of course, the situations were different, he admitted. But you were the first to walk away from our marriage. I just reacted. Samantha let out a breath, her anger giving way to something closer to frustration. I know you tried to show concern, to make an effort despite everything. And I did appreciate that. Daniel's expression softened for a moment, but only briefly. Then, as if switching gears, Samantha asked hesitantly, Are you planning to divorce me? Daniel exhaled slowly. At the moment, no. I intend to keep things as they are. She studied his face, trying to read his emotions. But there's something else, isn't there? A shadow crossed his expression. Alana wants to marry me, he admitted. Samantha's stomach twisted. And? She's even gone as far as to draft a prenuptial agreement, he added. In my favor. Samantha felt her breath catch, but she didn't let the emotion show. For the first time, she realized that this wasn't just about her choices anymore. Daniel had made his own. Samantha had always told herself that as long as things remained the same, she could live with it. The most important thing was that she and Daniel could still spend time together. And for now, that was exactly how it was going to stay. You can keep seeing Ryan, or anyone else you choose, Daniel said matter-of-factly. And I'll continue my relationship with Alana. It was too much. Had she been naive? She had assumed their marriage would hold, that they would somehow continue coexisting despite everything. But now, with Daniel openly maintaining his relationship with Alana, his time at home had become scarce. He spent more nights at the office, and though Samantha understood why, it didn't make the distance any less painful. As the days passed, something else unsettled her, an unfamiliar discomfort. At first she ignored it, but soon she began experiencing stomach pains that wouldn't go away. It was strange. She had never had these kinds of health issues before. Meanwhile, Daniel was reviewing a document she had presented him, one that outlined the terms of their financial arrangement. I have no intention of claiming ownership of the company, she assured him. But as compensation, I asked for a little more in monetary terms. Daniel scanned the conditions, finding nothing excessive. In fact, it was likely far less than what a court would have awarded her. A settlement agreement was unnecessary. What truly intrigued him was, why now? Samantha hesitated before answering. There are several reasons, she admitted. But mostly, because I love you. She looked at him, her voice steady but laced with something deeper. I need to explain something to you, Daniel. I've loved you since the day we met, since Sheila Mullen's pool party all those years ago. Daniel said nothing, his expression unreadable. And I know that despite everything, I'll always love you, she continued. I've been chasing something, believing it would make me feel whole, but the truth is, I've only ended up lonelier. Her voice wavered slightly. But now we have a chance to be together again. Daniel studied her carefully. Are you planning to keep the baby? Samantha exhaled slowly, her hands resting protectively over her stomach. Thanks to your generosity, I'll have the opportunity to take care of the child properly. I'll also be able to hire a full-time nanny, whose expenses indirectly you'll be covering. Daniel's jaw tightened. I see. She gave a small, almost wistful smile. I thought I'd want to leave this house when everything fell apart. But now I realize I don't. I love this home, Daniel. It's the perfect place to raise my child. He didn't argue. Perhaps he was too tired to fight. In the end, Samantha realized the weight of her choices. Because of her own recklessness, she had lost the one thing she never thought she would, a husband who had once loved her unconditionally. And now, she was bringing a child into a world where love no longer meant what it used to.